Hey there, welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, digging beneath the surface to uncover the hidden ideas that form us, the church, and the culture. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 1. Let's dig in. For many people, 2020 was a really crummy year. It certainly was for our family, and not just because of the pandemic. Like everyone else, we dealt with lockdowns and social distancing and a constant stream of bad news and unknowns. However, my wife and I also experienced additional heartbreak and abandonment, betrayal, and a sudden and shocking change in our personal and professional lives. As 2020 dragged on into 2021, I realized it wasn't just the various crises that I was struggling with. It was how my heart was responding to the crises. Depression, exhaustion, disillusion, anger, lots of anger. I withdrew into an inner sanctum of doubt, confusion, relentless self-introspection, and a growing sense of disenchantment with the Christian institutions and the systems, the communities, the friendships, the beliefs I had held so dear. They had failed. Or I had failed them. I wasn't sure. What was going on? I'm a lifelong Christian. I don't remember a day without Jesus. I started following him when I was 6 years old. I've been in church my entire life. I'm fairly well educated. I've memorized some scripture. I know the books of the Bible. I've studied and can articulate a Christian worldview as well as most. I served in the church. I spent half my career as an executive in full-time Christian ministry. But well into 2021, my heart hadn't improved, nor had my perspective. What was happening to my faith? What happened to our community? Where did everybody go? Where did God go? What in the world was wrong with me? I poured back through the Bible and read about this abundant life, this perfect peace, that if I trusted in God, he would make my paths straight. I didn't resonate with any of these promises. In fact, reading them just frustrated me. Jesus claimed we would do greater works than he did. His yoke is supposed to be easy. I reread the story of Stephen's execution. As this amazing disciple was being killed, he echoed Jesus' words from the cross, pleading for the forgiveness of his murderers. His heart must have been broken, and so was mine. How was he praying for the forgiveness of his killers while I was questioning the very foundations of my faith? Something was missing, something really important. Surely there was more to the Christian life than this. I know we all suffer, but it seems like some people suffer well, and I wasn't one of them. I was so disconnected from God, from other people, maybe even from myself. After decades of being in Christian community, this series of crises had uncovered an uncomfortable question. I was a Christian, but was I a genuine disciple? If a disciple is someone who is becoming more like Jesus, did that describe me? Was I more like Jesus now than I was 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago? Was I making any progress, even though I've been sitting in church and doing Christian things for decades? My honest answer was I didn't know. I certainly knew more about Jesus than I did 10 years ago, but is information the same as formation? I had done all of the so-called Christian things that Christians do, church and small groups and Bible studies and prayer times, and I couldn't tell you whether my heart was any more closer to Jesus than it was when I was a kid. Unable to claw my way out of depression by myself, I finally agreed to speak with a new friend who offered to help me dig into my heart. And I threw myself into what has always been my close friends, books. And so began a slow, sometimes halting, admittedly painful journey of healing curiosity. I ventured into dozens of texts ranging from ancient church history to anthropology, neuroscience, philosophy, spiritual disciplines, trauma recovery, the history of Western thought, theology, and cultural studies. And one of the books I came across is called Renovation of the Heart by philosopher and theologian Dallas Willard. He was a philosophy professor at USC. I didn't know who he was, but I figured if anyone's heart needed renovating, it was mine. Despite being a Bible-believing Christian my entire life, Willard used a few terms which were new to me. He referred to discipleship as spiritual formation. I suppose I had heard the phrase before, but it had never registered. He talked about the word ideas in a way I had never encountered and, frankly, made me a bit uncomfortable. We use the word formation in lots of different ways. educational formation, character formation, skill formation. Let's say you're a high school senior and you want to grow to become a surgeon. You embark on a rather immersive journey of educational formation. How about raising kids? We want our children to grow up to be mature, healthy civilians. We call this journey character formation. Developing a trade, that's called skill formation. Willard taught that being a disciple means that we are apprentices of Jesus so that we become more like him. That the core of who we are, our hearts or our spirits, are formed more like his. That over time, we do the things he did. We love like he loves. We think like he thinks. We desire what he desires. So to be a disciple really is about character formation, or as he put it, spiritual formation. However, the types of formation we just mentioned are all designed to be experienced in certain types of environments or ecosystems. Our educational formation happens with specific instructors in specific intentional communities. Our character formation is primarily experienced at home with caregivers with whom we initially spend enormous amounts of time. If we're working a trade, we apprentice with a more senior person in close proximity over extended time so that our skills are formed properly. There's a deeply relational, even experiential aspect to how we're formed. Instruction is part of our formation, but it certainly isn't the majority of it. As we read the Gospels in the book of Acts, we realize that spiritual formation is not something we're supposed to experience by ourselves, yet that's exactly what many of us are doing today. In contrast to other highly formative experiences, our discipleship is primarily self-directed, meaning I choose a church, I listen to a non-interactive sermon, I choose a small group study with a topic I'm interested in, and maybe I take a marriage class. The way modern Christianity works, I'm basically in charge of my own formation based on the spiritual engagements I choose. It's almost like an a la carte menu. Self-directed discipleship doesn't make a lot of sense. The Bible tells us our hearts are mysterious and have a habit of wandering. The purposes, the desires in our hearts are like deep wells. Many of us aren't in tune with our desires. If we struggle to understand our own hearts, we may not be the best person to direct our own heart's formation. In fact, Dallas Willard believed the state of genuine disciple-making was so off-target in the West, he called it the Great Omission. He also proposed a rather surprising, disconcerting, and fascinating concept about what drives our spiritual formation, and it doesn't sound at all like what most of us have been taught. Willard claimed that at the very root of our discipleship, of our journey to become more like Jesus, we don't find doctrine or theology or even belief. We find ideas. He doesn't mean ideas like our aha moments when we suddenly form a new thought or solution. He isn't referring to the metaphorical light bulb above our heads. He means assumptions and principles buried deep in the recesses of our hearts, hidden, somewhat mysterious things of which we aren't even normally conscious. Well, that got my attention. I don't recall reading about ideas in the Bible, and I didn't particularly like the thought that I was powered and governed by concepts of which I wasn't even aware. But then I discovered Willard wasn't the first person to explore ideas. In fact, they've been the subject of intense discussion and dating back to early philosophers and theologians, people like Plato and Aristotle, Descartes, Augustine, Aquinas, Kierkegaard, and Calvin. Ideas are constantly and powerfully at work in individual hearts, but also families, communities, cultures, and even nations, and most of us don't know that they're there. So here's our workable definition of an idea. An idea is a fundamental concept, assumption, or principle in which our hearts are rooted, but of which we are generally unaware. Willard wrote, "Ideas are so essential to how we approach life that we often do not understand when or how ideas are at work. People don't know what moves them, but ideas govern them and have their consequences anyway." Once we begin to be aware of ideas, we realize just how prevalent they are. We have ideas about everything: freedom, science, God, love, sex, culture, marriage. We have ideas about what it means to be human. Our hearts unconsciously embrace ideas about our identity, our authority, our power. And these ideas are not just buried in our hearts because of the media or information we consume. These ideas are powerfully formed by our stories, by our individual relationships and experiences. Just how powerful are these systems of ideas? How much do they influence us, our behaviors, our words, what or whom we love? Dallas Willard commented on how evil impacts our world through idea systems. And he wrote, quote, "These systems are the power's main tool for dominating humanity," end quote. Systems of ideas are the main tools for dominating humanity? That's a rather bold claim. If true, these unconscious systems of ideas have enormous implications on us, our relationships, our families, even cultural institutions like the arts or government. In Colossians 1, Paul talks about two kingdoms, a dark kingdom and a light kingdom, and I wondered how idea systems fit with these two kingdoms. Perhaps the kingdom of God has one set of ideas and the kingdom of darkness has another. As if answering my question from the 18th century, theologian and thinker Jonathan Edwards once wrote, "Truth is the agreement of our ideas with the ideas of God." Two sets of ideas. One set belongs to the kingdom of light, the other to the kingdom of darkness. One set of ideas results in human flourishing and goodness, and the other set is designed to kill us. And apparently our hearts embrace a combination of ideas from both kingdoms. And back to our original question, how do these mysterious ideas relate to our discipleship, our spiritual formation? If my heart is rooted in ideas from both the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light, how does this impact my journey to become more like my King? Willard wrote, "The process of spiritual formation in Christ is one of progressively replacing those destructive images and ideas with the images and ideas that filled the mind of Jesus himself." Discipleship is a process of replacing ideas of darkness with ideas of light, understanding that many of us don't even know these ideas exist or how they got there. This seemed like a far deeper, far richer way of thinking about discipleship and spiritual formation than just showing up to church and doing a Bible study, as good as those things are. If we could understand the ideas of Jesus, that would give us a better vision of who he is, and if we could determine which ideas are working in our own hearts, that would provide us with a path and a context for our own spiritual formation. Well, how easy is it for these ideas to slowly change in our hearts? Willard said, quote, "Changing those governing ideas is one of the most difficult and painful things in life." Jesus confronted and undermined an idea system and its culture, which in turn killed him. He proved himself greater than any idea system or culture, and he lives on. He is continuing the process of a worldwide idea shift that is crucial to his perpetual revolution, in which we each are assigned a part. End quote. We grow to become more like Jesus through the progressive transformation of these hidden, unconscious ideas that sit in our hearts. And that journey isn't simple or perhaps particularly comfortable. Well, at this point, I needed a visual aid. I needed some way to see how all this fits together, so I started sketching a simple drawing. I drew a nature scene to help me get my arms around all of this, and it's called the Creation Picture. You can find it at the Resources tab at soilandroots.org. I'll describe it here briefly. The outside of the picture is just a large circle. The circle represents all of creation and the cosmos, thus the name of the drawing. Inside the circle, in the background, are 7 mountains. These represent what's known as the 7 mountains of culture. We'll dig into those in a few episodes, but the mountains are areas like business and media, entertainment, government. In the foreground is a big, beautiful tree, and that's you. And around you are other trees. Those are people you interact with. We're all placed in 4 relationships. We have a relationship with God. He's the invisible author of the picture. A relationship with ourselves and others, and with creation itself. It's a cutaway scene, so you can see what's going on underneath the surface. You can see the roots of your tree. The roots represent your heart, which is your core, your center, the deepest part of you. What you love, what you desire. Life and love flow from your heart, just as life comes up from the roots of trees. Your roots are planted in the soil. So in this creation picture, the soil represents ideas, fundamental assumptions and principles in which our hearts are rooted, but we typically don't know they're there. Thus, the name of the organization, Soil and Roots, and the title of this podcast. our hearts, and the idea systems that govern and influence them as we journey in discipleship. Ultimately, Soil and Roots as an organization exists to help us cultivate what we call deep discipleship in community. This is a journey beneath our healthy and formative Christian rituals and our belief statements. Deep discipleship is a journey into the realm of exploring the ideas and desires of Jesus and exploring the ideas and desires in our own hearts. And as we're going to discover together, our ideas and desires don't always match up with what we say we believe. To some extent, we're all disconnected. We long for a deeper, richer, experiential relationship with God and others and ourselves and even with His creation. Deep discipleship is the journey we take together to reconnect and to experience this abundant life, this life of peace, even when we suffer. This podcast is mapped out specifically to help us journey into deep discipleship. We're going to explore the heart of Jesus, and we're going to explore our own hearts and our own stories. We're going to ask a lot of questions, some of which are uncomfortable. We'll ask questions of ourselves, of God, even of our traditions and our Christian institutions. We're going to explore the Bible, and we're also going to dig into anthropology, philosophy, culture, science, and a whole lot more. Deep discipleship involves a lot of curiosity, even about things we normally take for granted. If you're concerned about Western culture and the modern Christian church, if you've ever asked some of the same sort of questions I have, I invite you to stick around. If you're concerned about this great omission, this may be a wonderful journey for you. If you're a skeptic, or you're not currently apprenticing with Jesus or have deconstructed, this podcast may pose some questions you might find worth exploring. If you sense a spiritual shallowness, a disconnection, a longing for more in your journey with Jesus, I think this may be a place for you. Perhaps you're checking out and exploring this podcast on your own. Great to have you. You also may be a part of what's called a greenhouse. Much more on that to come, but a greenhouse is a community formed and supported through Soil and Roots that comes together to become more like Jesus in this journey of deep discipleship. If you're part of a greenhouse, welcome, and I'm excited and praying for your journey as well. As we close today, just one more note. The transformation of ideas in our hearts takes place in ways that modern Christianity doesn't always talk about. So some of this podcast journey may be new to you, but it isn't really new. It's more about recovering what's been lost or forgotten over the past few hundred years. Each episode builds on previous ones, so I do recommend you listen to or read the episodes in order. Many of the episodes are transcribed, and you can find them on the website. Admittedly, it takes a while to get used to this concept of ideas and how powerful they are and how they profoundly impact our hearts, our children, our marriages, and even our culture. So we're going to dissect one in episode 2. It's an idea that most people think they know rather well. In fact, it's pretty well baked into the church and into our culture. It's an idea of the gospel. But as we'll discover, the unconscious assumptions we make about the gospel may be different than what the gospel actually is. Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information on Soil and Roots, check out the website at www.soilandroots.org, and feel free to drop us an email at fish@soilandroots.org. And we'll see you next time.